everyone, I'm Allie with Potomac Beads. I'm going to show you how to do a unique bead cap for the top of a tassel. I'm actually doing this to match a friend's pair of earrings, so we'll have fun building together. If you need any of the materials, remember they are listed below the video in the little drop down near that subscription to purchase from us online at PotomacBeads.com as well as PotomacBeads.eu. So to begin, I have my earring here that Teresa made and I had gifted to a friend last year for her birthday, and she needs a necklace to go with it. So I thought a nice long tassel that it's not overwhelming since the earrings are a little large would work really well. To do the tassel cap, the first thing you're going to need is something that you want to wrap around in the 11O seed bead color. Because of the bright colors here in the actual earring design, I'm going to be using fairly bright seed beads. I have on a needle 16 11O seed beads. These 11O seed beads are a Miyuki color in the opaque orange. And I have them on a 0.006 wildfire beading thread in the green color on a size 12 needle. The tassel I'm using is the 2.5 millimeter satin tassel. If you have a larger tassel, the determining factor for the amount of beads is one that's going to fit around the tassel. I'm going to be cinching up and getting a little bit tighter right there in the middle. So you want to kind of sit it around the tassel, make sure that it goes the whole way around, kind of pulling the tassel together a little bit further down along the line. So again, 16 is my count here. And we're going to begin peyote stitch and go basically upward. So in another video, Teresa had done a tutorial on making a peyote strip and kind of putting it together. We're actually going to be building the peyote from the bottom and working our way up to the top. Once you know your count of your opening ring, you're going to sew back through one bead so that way you get a nice rounded circle. So I had my original 16 beads on and I sewed back through one of that first bead that I put on my thread and needle. If you want to, you can put a stop bead on or just give a little tension on that tail. As we get around and do our peyote stitch, in this tubular peyote, you won't have to hold on as much as you go. So from here, I'm going to pick up a bead, skip the next bead in line, and go through basically the third bead. This is peyote stitch. If you're not sure of peyote stitch, you want to maybe watch one of the other videos before actually going in and kind of learning how to do tubular stitch. I have another 11O. I'm going to skip that next bead in line and go through again kind of that third bead. You're going through one bead, skipping one bead, and going through the next one in line. As we go around, the original row of peyote stitch was 16 beads. Each time I add a new row, I'm going to be adding 8 beads. The original peyote stitch row is actually 2 rows at once. I'm continuing around, skipping a bead, adding one so they sit kind of in that brick wall section. Because we're doing tubular peyote, originally this first line is going to look a little bit like a sun, that the beads are kind of forced sitting out like this. As we do our second row, it'll start to go into that tubular shape. Skipping a bead, adding a bead, all along. And I'm using this pumpkin color again to kind of match that opaque orange to match. All right, so as I go through my last bead here, I'm going to come around full circle and give a nice tight pull onto that peyote stitch. When you add the last bead in, you're going to go through that first bead that your thread was coming out of. That's going to finish this row of the peyote stitch. From here, we're going to step up. To step up, we want to go through that first bead that we put on in the second row. That's considered our step up. Now we're going to kind of force it more into that tubular shape. And to do so, you're going to add a seed bead, and then we're going to catch on to those 8 beads that we just added in what is actually this third row. You're going to pick up a bead, and you're going to see all those beads that are kind of sitting to the exterior of that little sun shape. You're going to add a bead and sew through that next second row or third row of beads. Add a bead, sew through that next row. So again, if you want to keep track, you can actually put 8 beads in a pile so you know when you are finished with this row. I have 3 on. I'm going to do a 4th And as I do these and kind of pull nice and tight too, I want to, with my fingers, make it curve so that way it starts to sit in that tubular shape. Add a bead, go through the next one. And as you get to the end of this row here, you'll notice too that you no longer have to really hold on to that starter thread. I'm gonna sew through here, give it a nice tight pull, and you'll see basically I have kind of one opening still to go. One more bead goes on. And then this one, as I go through and go through that first bead kind of that we went through, I'm gonna also go through the first bead. So I'm stepping up through 2 beads. The last bead that my thread was coming out of, and then that first bead that I added on this 4th row. Once you're done that row and you have that nice step up there, you'll be able to see kind of that peyote stitch taking place. Every single row that you look at should have 2 beads in that row, all the way around. That's gonna get us, again, that starting top to this cover. So kind of looking at it now, push it on a little bit, you can see kind of that nice little peyote stitch. From here, I'm gonna add a little bit of the blue in so that way I have a little bit of that color. Remember that I have 8 beads that I'm adding in along the peyote stitch. I have these 1.5 millimeter rondelles, and I'm gonna add 1 rondelle in as I go around and start my next row. I don't want a ton of this bling color because it's really just in the cabochon. And then I'm gonna add 1 11/0 seed bead. So this row is gonna consist of actually 4 of my crystals and 4 of my 11/0 seed beads. So every other piece that I pick up in this peyote stitch is going to be the crystal and then the 11. So I'm alternating what beads I pick up. Coming around to the end then, I will have my 4 crystals on. And you'll notice that as I'm going around here now, I'm tending to pull a little bit tighter. And you always want to pull the thread rather than at the needle, because that will potentially fray your thread where it's going through the needle. So every other row, or every other bead that I'm picking up in the peyote stitch is an 11/0 or a crystal, alternating between the 2. The crystals are a tiny bit bigger than the 11/0, so they will sit puckered out just a tiny bit. As you add in your last 11/0 seed bead, you're gonna go through the 11/0 that the thread was coming out of, as well as then doing a step up. If you don't step up, you'll get a spiral, and we don't want that for this project. You're gonna step up through that first blue Zircon rondelle and give a nice tight pull. We're gonna do 1 more row, and this is just going to be the 11/0 seed beads. So I'm back to adding 8 11/0 seed beads going around in this peyote stitch. I'm coming back around in the peyote stitch, and I'm adding my last 11/0. It's then gonna sew through the blue Zircon 1.5 millimeter, and then also through that first 11/0 that I put on in this row. That's gonna be my step up. Give a nice tight pull, and I want the crystals to kind of seem like they're in the middle of this cap. So I'm gonna go 1 more time around with my 11/0 seed beads, going 8 again in adding in those opaque orange seed beads. Next row is about to start now. Going through, I have my last 11/0 that I'm adding on this row that I had started, and I'm gonna add in, then you can see that 11/0 kind of sits right on top of that crystal. What I want you to do then is go 1 more time around with 11/0. So again, we have 8 more 11/0s that we're gonna add. What this is gonna do is pull that cap really in a lot closer, and then we'll actually start to downgrade and get the cap into a smaller kind of rounded top. From here, we're gonna go into actually making the top smaller, having it be basically downgrading that peyote. I do want to add a little bit more bling along the top here, and that it kind of sits off-centered from the bead that's already on there. So I'm going to add 1 of my 11/0s, and I already did my step up. Go through, pull a nice and a little tighter. I'm going to go down a row of the peyote stitch, and then go up the row of the peyote stitch. We're sewing down and up a row. That's going to give us only 4 beads going on. You add a bead, sew through the next bead just like you would regular peyote, and then instead of adding another bead, We're going to sew down to the previous row of the peyote stitch, and then we're going to sew up through the bead that sits right after it. So we're going to end up again with 4 beads on. 1 bead goes on. I'm going to sew through just like I'm doing my next row of peyote stitch. Going to sew down 1 bead, up 1 bead. Again, my final 11-0 goes on. I'm going to sew just like peyote stitch through the next bead in line. Give it a nice tight kind of yank. Sew down the row. And then sew up the row. Because I'm finished adding on and I finished that peyote stitch row, I'm also going to sew up through that first 11-0 that I just added. From here, what I'm going to do is add 4 crystals, sewing through all of the 11-0s that are sitting up. If you do not have this size crystal, you can switch this entire project from the crystal to an 8-0 seed bead. I'm going to add 4 crystals to kind of close up this top here, adding in and sewing in the 1 crystal, and then on to the next open bead. So I'll have 4 of these blue crystals right along the top. Get 1 more out here. Have that blue crystal in there, and I'm going to sew back through that last 11-0 as well as through that first crystal. Give a nice tight yank to get that kind of crystal top along it done. I'm going to then reinforce that top, sewing along that whole last row. So I'm sewing back through all of the 11s and that crystal. So you're going to sew back through 8 beads total through the 4 crystals and the 11s. Now what I want to do is actually get down further in my project because I want to bring some of the color down to the bottom as well. What you can do, there's 2 options here. You can put this in here and we're going to seam right along the bottom and keep it in there. What I'm actually going to do is to get some wire to create a loop for my actual tassel to hang from. So you want some 24 or 22 gauge wire. And I have just a small piece here of the 22 gauge or 24 gauge wire, putting my bead cap off to the side a little bit. I'm going to put this wire right through the top of the cap. If your bead cap already has a little cone or something on it, you can either remove that or you can use that instead. I have that 24 gauge piece of wire that I've gone through the top of that tassel, kind of forcing it through. I'm going to cross over, again it's about 3-inch piece of wire, cross over the wire right along the top of the tassel. Take the shorter piece of wire, you can hold with your round nose pliers if you want, and I'm going to wrap that around the longer piece 1 time. Take my wire cutters and cut off the extra piece of wire. From here then you're going to get ready to put your tassel cap on. I'm going to put that piece of wire right out the top of that tassel cap and then push that cap right inside my portion of my loop there. So there you can see that fun kind of seed bead look around the top of the tassel. I'm going to end this with, you can seam it further if you want to. I'm going to end this with that purple color that's part of my earrings with one of the saucers in the bright purple to kind of pull it all together. After that bright purple saucer, I'm going to come down and add a little bit more of that blue color along the bottom here. But what I'm going to do here is go in and make my loop before adding in the 15-0s at the bottom and kind of cinching it up. I'm going to make my loop with my round nose pliers, and I'm making 1 and 2 loops, basically making a split ring type of a loop. It's going to secure it a little bit more. Hold with your needle nose pliers and coil that extra wire around. I'm going to cut off that extra wire after 1 complete coil, and there I have that top. So now the tassel is basically on there. I'll go in and kind of pinch this down a little bit. My tassel is on there, and all I need to do now is get ready to bring my 15-0s in to actually pull in and cinch the bottom. I'll also have an opportunity then to tie off this extra thread and get rid of that as well. So the last thing we're gonna do is bring the whole cap together with some 15-0s at the bottom of the piece. I chose the purple color again because I'm matching up to the earrings. And what we're gonna do is sew from the top of the cap to the bottom of the cap. So I'm here at the top, I'm gonna sew down through the peyote, basically sewing on an angle so you don't see any extra thread, through a couple beads, through to the next bead down, through to the next bead down. Always kind of going on an angle. You don't want to pull too tightly on that because sometimes it can actually switch your bead cap to have a little bit of an angle. But you're going to get right to the bottom and out through that first row of the peyote stitch. Give your beginning thread to a little tight pull and step down into what is one of those first beads. Going around the circle now, I'm going to add 2 15s and go through one of my 11-0 seed beads, kind of pulling tight, getting those in there. Step up through the first bead. Going down, we're going to do just like we did on the other one. And we're adding 2 beads in. Sorry, my fault there. Went through an extra bead. 2 beads go on, go through the 11. So you can see it has that kind of nice little skirt that's going on it. 2 15s through the next 11. And you can basically take this cap down as far as you want to. You could keep going, you can stop. You could have not even added the 15s at all. That's up to you. I want that purple color for sure in this, so I'm getting those in. Going through then, sewing around, I have 2 15s that I'm putting between each of my 11s to get kind of that nice little skirt. I'm going to continue then one more row with my 15s, again, just to get that purple color in that nice line. So I'm going to sew through the 11, through the 2 15s that are there, and then in between each one here, I'm going to add 1 15 and sew through the 2 15s. Adding 1, sew through the next 2. And this is going to finish up my cap. Sewing through 1, or adding 1, sewing through the next 2. So I'm going to end up with 8 11s in this row. The row previous to it, because we were doubling them, had 16. Pull that tassel down a little bit. 1 in. Get that nice little cap look. Bead goes on and around. 2 more to add in. 1. Give that nice tight pull. Last one goes on. You're going to go through those first 2 15s. Oh, not getting the tassel in your thread. We'll pull that out. And then we're going to finish up the top of the tassel. So I managed to fix my little tassels that I pulled through. And what I'm going to do is finish off the end of the piece. And I think it matches the earrings really nicely without being kind of overly matchy-matchy. I didn't want to do bright purple because I didn't want too much of that purple. All right, now going through here, I'm going to go back up just like we did previously. Coming down the piece, I'm going back up the piece, pulling nice and tight to get that little purple edge. And I'm going to go back to that starter thread. So I'm sewing on that last row of peyote basically through, zigzagging through the orange beads. Once you get back to that starter thread, zigzagging through, so you can see I'm doing kind of 2 at a time. All you have to do is tie a knot. Now again, if you want to, you could have kind of glued the tassel. You can finish off the tassel cap with a wire guard and actually not have the wire coming out of the top. I wanted to mimic the silver of the ear wire, so that's why I went with wire coming out of the top. But if you don't have wire and you have a wire guard, you can do one more row of 11s along the top of the cap, and then you don't have to worry about any sort of wire working. As I finish here, I am out the exact same spot where that starter thread is. I'm literally just going to tie a knot and finish off the piece with a nice, tight knot. Once I have that tight knot done, go in with your thread zap or your thread burner and burn those 2 thread edges down. The 2 that are a little left here, burn those nice and flush next to the project, and they will hide out right underneath that blue zircon. And there you have the end of the bead cap. So it's a nice simple way to show how to kind of downgrade and increase kind of that peyote, adding in extra beads or kind of having that space be caught up. And I think hopefully I did Teresa proud and made a nice little necklace to go along with her earrings, and hopefully Mary Stewart likes them as well. Thanks so much for watching me make this 2.5-inch tassel cap. Remember that you can change this up based on how many beads you need to go around the stop of the actual tassel, as well as how long you want it to be. You can keep that tubular form of the peyote, make it as long as you want to slip over that top of the tassel. As always, if you need any of the materials, we're happy to ship them to you from PotomacBeads.com as well as PotomacBeads.eu. If you want to see exactly what materials were used in this project, you can go below the video to the description and hit that Show More button. Get links for the exact products. As always, thank you so much for watching this tassel cap, and have fun creating your own.